Okay, let's dive into this stack of sources you've shared. We've got a few different sections represented today: editorial, science, text. Looks like university autonomy, crypto in India, heat waves, economic metrics, and even data centers.
Yeah, quite a mix. But they all touch on some pretty significant current issues. Ready to unpack them.
Absolutely. First up, from the editorial section, this piece by Arun Kumar on university autonomy. He says universities are facing an unprecedented challenge.
Mm-hmm. He notes it's been building in India for decades, but really flared up in the U.S. more recently, like since early 2025.
He gives that pretty startling U.S. example: the Trump administration reportedly freezing billions, $3.2 billion of Harvard's funding, and maybe revoking tax-exempt status.
Exactly. And Harvard's president, Alan Garber, is quoted worrying this kind of political pressure could be an existential threat.
So the argument is that funding is being used as a weapon, basically, to force changes in admissions, protest policies, DEI, faculty, that sort of thing.
That's the author's point regarding the U.S. situation. But he contrasts it with India, where he says the shift from academic control to bureaucracy has been more gradual over like 40 years.
And academics facing challenges might not always get institutional backing. He mentions a specific case.
Yeah, involving a prestigious private university, suggesting institutions sometimes don't defend their faculty in these situations.
It brings up that core tension, doesn't it? Universities needing to generate new knowledge, which can be disruptive, but also needing to, reproduce societal structures. How do they balance that?
Well, that's the crux of it. The author argues that generating genuinely new, socially relevant knowledge needs autonomy. It allows for the long-term view, anticipating things like AI's impact or challenging the accepted way of thinking.
Like Galileo.
Right, challenging orthodoxy, which inevitably makes universities look anti-establishment sometimes. Precisely. And the source suggests that regimes may be focused on narrower agendas, don't really value that kind of challenging new idea, so they try to limit autonomy, pushing academics towards just reinforcing the status quo.
And things like market pressures and focusing only on tech advancements push towards short-term thinking too, making things seem simpler than they are.
Yeah, the piece argues it leads to a simplistic view where the imaginary can masquerade as reality. It notes the U.S. and China historically built strength on independent universities, though it questions if the U.S. system is now being undermined.
Funding's obviously key here. Research is expensive.
Very. And private funding often comes with strings attached, usually profit-related. So public funding is vital. The editorial claims that in India, with low private R&D spend, declining public funds post-1991 gave the state more power to curb autonomy, often via appointments.
So it circles back to that tension. Knowledge creation needs freedom to challenge, but that looks like opposition. Short-term pressures undermine this, leading to that hollowing out the Harvard president mentioned.
It really makes you think about the long-term health of innovation and critical thinking in a society, doesn't it?
Okay, let's shift to the second editorial piece. This one's about India and virtual digital assets, VDAs, or crypto.
Right. And it starts by highlighting India's, well, really high grassroots adoption. Second, globally for retail investors, billions invested, potential for a lot of jobs.
But there's a big gap between that reality and the regulatory situation, which the piece calls rocky.
Definitely. It even mentions the Supreme Court recently questioning the lack of clear rules, saying something like, banning might be shutting your eyes to reality.
That's quite direct. And India does have specific challenges, like fitting VDAs into existing capital controls and payment systems. The RBI had concerns way back in 2013. Their 2018 ban was overturned, but since then it's been, well, uncertain. The main tool used has been taxation, brought in around 2022.
That's the 1% TDS on larger transactions and the pretty hefty 30% capital gains tax, with no loss offsetting allowed. Yeah. But the editorial argues these tax measures haven't really worked as a regulatory tool. Huge amounts are apparently still traded on offshore platforms that aren't compliant. We're talking trillions of rupees estimated.
Trillions. Wow. And that means lost tax revenue too, right? Billions in uncollected TDS.
Over 60 billion rupees estimated since July 2022. And trying to just block the websites didn't really work either. People found workarounds, VPNs, mirror sites.
So this brings in the role of VASP as virtual asset service providers, the compliant ones, like Indian exchanges. The article says they're crucial.
Yeah, it calls them bridges and eyes for regulators, because they can help ensure compliance, especially with anti-money laundering rules, and give regulators visibility. The current policy, the piece argues, pushes users offshore, which actually reduces visibility and control.
And these Indian VASPs have apparently shown they want to comply, working with the FIU India, getting positive FATF feedback.
Right. And they took steps after that big 2024 hack to improve security, set up insurance funds, develop industry guidelines. They're positioned as essential for a safer ecosystem and for contributing to the economy.
So the conclusion here is that India needs to move beyond just taxing crypto without proper regulation towards a more balanced framework that actually uses these compliant domestic players.
Exactly. The current approach seems counterproductive, pushing activity out of sight and potentially hindering a domestic industry rather than creating a safe, regulated space.
It's that tricky balance, again, regulating innovation without stifling it or driving it away.
Always a challenge with new tech.
Okay, moving to the science section now. An article on India's heat. And it tackles that question head on. Is it hotter or are we just more sensitive?
And the evidence cited is clear. It is hotter. Heat waves are coming earlier, lasting longer, and becoming more intense across India.
The official definition involves specific temperature deviations, but the key stat is that cumulative heat wave days, they soared, more than tripled between 2010 and 2024.
Yeah, from about 177 to over 530 cumulative days. That's summing up days across all affected regions. It shows the sheer scale increase.
And the death toll, the official numbers are likely way too low.
That's what the source strongly suggests. Many deaths happen outside hospitals, maybe misclassified, so researchers use excess mortality analysis. The global burden of disease estimated something like 155,000 heat-related deaths in India in 2021 alone, much higher than official figures.
That's staggering. And the economic damage is huge, too, affecting wheat yields, causing power crises, lost productivity. McKinsey projected it could hit GDP significantly by 2030.
Right. But here's the fascinating part. The article points out India used to have really smart ways of dealing with heat. Traditional architecture, work schedules, materials, urban planning with courtyards, stepwells.
Like Navtapa, that traditional 9-day heat period, it wasn't just folklore, it had practices associated with it. Why did we lose touch with that?
The source blames modern development, prioritizing speed and scale, using concrete and glass, rigid work schedules, lack of policy support for traditional methods. Basically, climate sensitivity got overlooked.
There are some formal responses now, like Ahmedabad's Heat Action Plan, which seems successful. Other cities are trying things.
True, but the article points out many plans are just advisory, lacking funds or teeth. Cooling shelters are few, and awareness campaigns often miss the most vulnerable people without digital access or who don't speak Hindi or English.
And the rural gap sounds huge. Most vulnerable people, but no real framework like the city plans. Key programs don't really factor in heat.
Exactly. Panchayats struggle. Traditional resources like water bodies are lost. Rural heat impacts often go unseen and unaddressed.
There's also a communication issue. Getting complex science feels like temperature across effectively, using the right channels and languages.
Yeah, relying on digital platforms and just Hindi English excludes so many. Need local radio, community workers, posters, real grassroots communication.
So the path forward involves blending science and tradition, tailoring plans, embedding heat sensitivity in big national schemes, using finance mechanisms, updating building codes, better coordination.
Pretty much. The knowledge is there, mixing old wisdom and new data. It seems to come down to political will and effective implementation, especially ensuring it reaches rural and vulnerable groups.
It's a reminder that adaptation isn't always about high-tech solutions, but sometimes about remembering and integrating what worked before.
Couldn't agree more. Resilience needs that blend.
Okay, fourth source from the text section. This one tackles India's economy, the narrative around its size versus people's actual well-being. It notes the recent focus on India's GDP rank based on IMF projections.
Yeah, the projection that India might hit fourth largest in 2025 and third largest by 2028 based on market exchange rates.
And the source points out this is often framed politically, linking the rank to leadership and setting targets for 2047. But it immediately adds the critique. GDP size alone doesn't tell you much about people's lives.
Right. Health, education, inequality, unpaid work, none of that is captured. It mentions calls to revise national accounts and use broader indicators, and also flags how politicizing statistics can muddy the waters.
Comparing GDP internationally needs a common currency, usually the US dollar. The article explains the two main ways. First, market exchange rates, simple conversion. That's the one giving the fifth, then fourth, then third rank projection.
But then there's purchasing power parity, PPP. This tries to account for what money actually buys in different countries, because, a haircut or rent costs much less in Mumbai than New York.
So PPP adjusts for those local price differences.
Exactly. And when you use PPP, developing country GDP figures tend to look larger relative to developed ones.
Mm.
The U.S. GDP, for example, was 7.5 times India's by market rates in 2024, but only 1.8 times by PPP.
And using PPP, the source says India has already been the third largest economy since 2009 and is projected to stay third.
That's the key finding highlighted. It suggests the focus on the market rate projection might be, well, selective, fitting a particular narrative better than the PPP one, which is often seen as better for comparing economic size over time.
There's a note of caution about PPP, though. It can inflate figures more in poorer countries due to low wages, informal economy, unpaid work.
Yes, it needs careful interpretation. But the article's main counterpoint to the big economy idea isn't just about PPP versus market rates. It's about population.
The per capita figure, dividing that big total GDP by 1.4 billion people.
Precisely. India's 2024 per capita GDP by market rates is around $2,700.
Yeah.
That puts it in the lower middle income bracket. Lower than Sri Lanka, lower than Bhutan, and significantly lower than Vietnam now, which was far behind India back in 1991.
And the global rank per capita is pretty low, 144th by market rates, 127th by PPP.
So the source calls it the big economy illusion. The total size has little bearing on the average person's well-being. The crucial takeaway is to look beyond that single number at indicators that actually reflect people's lives and progress.
Focusing just on the aggregate rank, especially using the method that sounds best politically, kind of misses the point about actual living standards.
It really emphasizes the need for a broader perspective on what economic success means.
Right. Let's look at the final piece, also from text. Cooling data centers. Seems niche, but hugely important.
Absolutely. The basic issue is simple. Electronics get hot, really hot. A data center is like thousands of powerful computers packed together, generating enormous heat.
And they need constant cooling to function properly, right, to avoid failing.
Exactly. But the cooling itself uses a massive amount of energy, almost as much as the computing in many cases.
Which is a huge problem for climate goals, given the ICT industry needs to cut emissions drastically.
Demand for cloud services keeps rising, so even if chips get more efficient, the overall energy use for data centers, especially cooling, is a major concern. They need greener designs.
So this piece highlights a study by Microsoft and WSP Global using life cycle assessment, LCA.
Yes, LCA looks at the total environmental impact, cradle to grave. And the study found that advanced cooling methods, things like cold plates and immersion cooling, can make a big difference.
How much difference?
Compared to traditional air cooling using grid power, these methods could cut emissions 15–21%, energy use 15–20%, and water use by a really significant 31–52%.
What are these methods? Cold plates.
Think of them like targeted liquid cooling right on the processor. Small modules circulate coolant, pulling heat away much more efficiently than air.
And immersion cooling, literally dunking the hardware.
Pretty much. Submerging components in a special non-conductive oil or fluid that absorbs heat incredibly well. There are different ways it works, but the basic idea is direct liquid contact.
Benefits beyond energy saving. Less corrosion, more reliable, quieter.
Supposedly, yes. And big players like Microsoft and Alibaba are already using these systems.
But the article asks if it's truly green or just less dirty. There are trade-offs. Coolant regulations, complex designs.
Right. It uses the analogy of swapping plastic straws for paper. Are you just shifting the problem? That's why the LCA is important. You need to look at the whole system. Gains in cooling efficiency could be wiped out if making the coolant is polluting, or if the energy source isn't clean.
Like the electric car running on coal power example.
Exactly. And the LCA study confirmed that. Switching to 100% renewable energy massively boosts the benefits of advanced cooling. You get further cuts in emissions, energy, and water on top of the cooling tech savings.
And renewables alone make a huge difference, regardless of the cooling method.
That was a key finding. Renewables slashed emissions by 85–90% and water used by 55–85% in the models, no matter which cooling system was used.
So the takeaway is that tackling data center cooling is crucial for the ICT sector's climate goals, and LCAs help see the full picture, but ultimately clean energy is the biggest lever.
That seems to be the calculus. Efficient cooling is vital, but pairing it with renewables is where the major sustainability gains are found. It shows how interconnected these challenges are.
Fascinating how even something seemingly technical like data center cooling ties into these bigger environmental questions.
It really does. Every sector has its role to play.
Thank you for listening. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about.